Hi all listeners, welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today I'm joined by someone I know very well, Christian Nielsen, who's working as co-founder and CEO at Rightstars. Christian and I actually met 3 years ago while working at their help, and we worked together for a while. So as I said before, we know each other well. It's my pleasure, Christian, to host you today in my podcast.
Thanks, Oriol. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. And it's cool that we can meet again this time in your podcast. So look forward to the topics for today.
Well, no, thank you, Christian. It's weird now to meet in this different environment, but I'm sure it's going to be an interesting discussion. Mostly because you're going to be as well the first guest who's going to be discussing legal tech, or to be honest, anything related to the law. In my previous episode, we talked a lot with founders and central bankers, more about either FinTech or economy-related issues in general, but this is going to be like the first episode covering more like legal-related stuff. So I think we should start like from the very beginning. If you could please tell my listeners a bit more about your personal journey, like how you ended up doing what you're doing today, and anything you want to share.
Yeah, cool. So first of all, I'm Danish. I'm from Denmark, and by education, I'm a lawyer, and I used to work for probably a decade as a lawyer. I worked in small firms. I worked in probably one of the biggest firms in the world, City Austin, in Chicago, famously where Barack Obama met his wife. He was like a summer student, and she was the associate who had to be in charge of him. Well done for Barack to get a more senior together. So anyway, I would say I tried most things I feel within being a lawyer. So I also had my own firm together with a former client who was a VC partner. We were two together, created a firm focusing on helping startups. And funnily enough, one of our clients was AirHub, which is currently one of the most successful European B2C legal tech companies. Back then in 2013, me and Thomas, we ran into Henrik, which is one of the co-founders of AirHub. They had just got into Y Combinator, and they needed to figure out how to get a US entity in place, because otherwise they couldn't get in. They couldn't get investments. So we hurried and did a so-called Delaware flip. So they were ready for Y Combinator. And then during spring of 14, they went through the program, and had a fantastic demo day where AirHub was the crowd favorite, and they managed to get a really big round. It wasn't long after that AirHub approached me, because they never wanted to be a legal tech, actually. They had envisioned that they would be some kind of consumer service where if you have a problem with airlines, you go to AirHub, and AirHub takes care of the whole process, and that the process would be relatively smooth. So just sending a claim on behalf of the passenger to the airline in various ways after getting some information from the passenger, and then the airline would then pay. And it turned out, especially the last part was the tricky part, getting the airline to pay. So they came to me basically saying, we have a lot of these claims getting in, and a lot of people that want help, but basically we can't help them because the airlines, they just ignore us. They just give us bullshit rejections. So what can we do about it? And I think that question, that challenge, was just so exciting that I had to tell Thomas, my co-founder in the law firm, sorry, we have only been together for a year, but this is just too exciting. Because for me, I think personally, it was also an opportunity to kind of disrupt the legal industry, because I've seen many corners of it, and there was many places where I felt it was very too conservative. I still remember sitting in in law offices, and the senior partner coming by, and although I was just sitting in front of the computer writing a memo or drafting a contract or whatever, I was told to tighten my tie, because I had loosened it a bit just to breathe a little bit, but no, I had to have my tie all the way up, even though no one was looking at me. So that level of, I would say, of conservatism, in my opinion, just was a sign. It might be a small thing, but for me it was a sign that there needed to be a change. Another thing was recording everything you were doing during the day in 6-minute intervals, right? So that degree of control, together with sitting somewhere with your tie all over up in your throat, just didn't make any sense, right? No anymore. If it had ever made any sense. So yeah. So I thought this as an opportunity to challenge the old ways, and shake up the industry a little bit. And I think we did. So what happened was back in 2014, where I then said yes to the challenge and joined AirHelp. I came in, I think we were 10 people, spread out a little bit. A few were in New York, and then we had a handful as well in Poland, and that was it. So, and I think there were 1 or 2 like lawyers sitting in the office in Poland, and I think they didn't know what to do, because the challenge was quite big. We had claims for people from all over the world against airlines from all over the world, and these claims, the average value is around 600 euro. So if you approach a regular lawyer and tell him or her, can you please take care of this claim? They will say, yeah, sure. My hourly rate is 200 euros. It will probably take me 10-15 hours to support this claim, right? So 4 or 5 times as much as the entire claim value, right? So we had to figure out a model where we could actually help all these people, and at the same time not bankrupt ourselves. So inspired by primarily the US, where no cure, no pay is quite common, where lawyers, they work only on success fees. We started with that model and tried to figure out how could we then find lawyers who are willing to work with these types of claims. And there was a lot of selling involved. I had to pitch lawyers to actually join us and work with these claims, and try to make them understand that by using technology we could actually automate a lot of the processes, so they would spend very little time on average on a claim, and also work with them on try to explain them that by doing automation you can actually, one thing is that you can say technology taking a big part, but another thing is that you can then also use, I would say, like low cost people to do the rest, right? So the lawyer himself or herself only gets involved in a tiny percentage of the claims. But making that pitch, trying to make them understand the business model, was really, really difficult. And it took many hundreds of calls and emails to just get the first few lawyers. But then after we got the first few, and thanks to them for doing it, we started to get the ball rolling, right? Because then we could make references to existing legal partners. And by then we also had some success, right? So we could actually tell them, look, when we send you, let's say 100 claims, we can see that we are winning 95 of them, right? So a fantastic win rate. So you can be pretty sure that you're gonna get your, no cure, no pay part, right? Of course, that's extremely important. So once we started to have the data to kind of back up our business model, and we had a few lawyers already partnering with us, we could really get the snowball rolling. Yeah, you were a part of it too, Oriol, right? Because then later on we had to take on the world. So to begin with, we focused on Europe, where we had the very strong, still have. Let's hope it stays forever. It's very strong air passenger rights. Actually, before even talking to other lawyers, I had done it myself. So when I first talked to AirHelp back in 2013, one thing doing the Delaware flip, another was to actually handle their first cases. So the very first cases going to court. And I think we agreed on 10 cases. And back then it was very, it's very new. So even for me, I was like, yeah, we can agree on a success fee of some sort, but you're also going to pay me a fixed fee for just taking the case. But it ended up, I think out of the 10, we actually won all 10. And I think that was also kind of like made me a strong believer in the whole model, because I had tried it firsthand. And of course I had to work a little more on those 10 cases than anyone else later on, because I was kind of making the first steps, finding out how to sue, what defenses were available for the airlines, and try to kind of like get around those. So as we grew and got more and more law firms on board, the idea was that by suing the airlines and actually making them, like forcing them to pay in court, which also involves the airlines paying court fees to the winning party in many jurisdictions in Europe, and also refunding us the court fee that we had paid to actually file the case. So increasing the cost burden on the airlines, who also have lawyers representing them that they pay some way, right? Probably a lot more than we were paying our lawyers. We were hoping that extra cost burden would force the airlines to pay earlier. So instead of paying only when they got sued, that they would pay when we sent the claim to them. We did manage to get a few airlines to kind of change the behavior, but even though we filed at the heydays just before COVID, we were filing 10,000 cases per month in court. They were not changing their behavior, right? So they were, for them, apparently from a cash flow perspective, it still made more sense to wait, because airlines, some other businesses, but especially airlines, they are very cash flow sensitive. Yeah, so I think that just means that because we're afraid at some point that, will we take ourselves out of business? Will we be so good that airlines will just give up and pay everyone, right? Which means that, AirHelp will no longer be relevant, right? Because we had kind of solved the whole conflict. But luckily for AirHelp, that never happened, and I think it will never happen, because just from a pure cash flow, perspective, it just doesn't make sense for the airlines. So yeah, but anyway, that was kind of being a part of this, and we had some very fun moments where I felt like we were really making a big splash. For example, I remember when we decided to prepare our first batch of court cases. So I joined in July, something like that, and we were preparing for the first batch of court cases in late August, beginning of September 14. It was going to be filed in Danish court, the Copenhagen City Court, and we had selected 100 cases. Together with Nico, who was another co-founder and in charge of marketing, we had arranged that the Danish press would be present when we kind of delivered these 100 cases. So the funny thing is that already by then in Denmark, you actually file cases in the small claims court, in the city court, online. So there is no delivery of any like big pile of cases or anything like that. But because we wanted to do like a media stunt out of it, we filed it all online, but then we printed out everything, put it in big boxes. We drove my little Volkswagen up to the square in front of the city court, and then had, filmed that we opened the trunk, right? And of course, it looked big in my little car, that we had the trunk full of court cases. And then I took a big pile, and Nico a big pile, and then we were like carrying it up the steps and delivering it to the reception. And they were like, why are you bringing this in paper? But it was great, and we got a lot of media attention. I remember being interviewed on the court steps, where the interviewer, so what do you expect of these cases? And I said, we expect to win them all, right? I was very hyped at that moment. But funnily, we actually won them all. So all 100 we ended up winning. Yeah, it was a great time. And another thing that happened, which I think is also, showing the disruptiveness level of the business that iHelp has and still has, is that some courts, including also in Copenhagen, they actually developed a specific department within the court just to take care of the cases we're sending them. So they appointed a judge to be in charge of the department, and then they would have a few other judges that would kind of like circle in and take care when the caseload was very high. And then, of course, some more administrative staff just to take care of these cases we were sending. So they had to increase their budget, obviously, of course. And because they're funded by the Danish government had to increase the budget allocated for court cases in Denmark just because of our business. So I think that's kind of level of disruptiveness that any like new company would dream of. And for me, it was fantastic to see kind of us changing the ways that some lawyers were working now, using automation, using technology to actually help thousands of people. Because that's kind of like another part of it. And also one of the things that I love about iHelp is that we're really helping the small people, the individuals, in a fight against the big corp, in this case, airlines, and helping them win and getting right. So yeah, tremendous success story, and I'm forever be grateful for being a part of that.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing. I think it's a very interesting journey, and it's great to hear about how iHelp started. And you said many things that actually resonate to me. Like I myself, as most of my listeners know, started as a lawyer working for a big law firm, where, as you said, you need to wear your suit and tie very properly all the time, and you need to basically log everything you are doing, because you're billing by the hour. So it's a very different business model. And what you said now made me realize that there is an idea that I discuss lots of times in my articles or podcasts, which is that of financial inclusion. I mean, I know that financial inclusion is very important, that idea of allowing the unbanked people become part of the financial system. And to some extent, listening to you, I got to think that we could also talk about legal inclusion. I mean, this idea of allowing people to become part of the legal, not becoming part of the legal system, they already are, but to use the legal system whenever they need to. Because as you said before, if you need to pay $2,000 to a lawyer to file a claim that will bring you maybe in return, like, I don't know, let's say $200, it's not worth it. So that kind of pushes many people away from the legal system now. And I think that what companies like our help do, or in general legal tech companies, is precisely to allow people to become much more included now in these court and legal systems.
Absolutely right, Oriol, and and it's a really nice parallel to FinTech, banking beyond bank, and it's actually what we are trying now to do at Rightstars. So we are trying to reduce the justice gap. So that's what it's called in the legal world. So the amount of people who have legal problems but don't have access to solve them because it's too expensive or too complicated, and it's quite a big problem. So the American Bar Association has done some research and found out in the US, alone, so a pretty developed country, 2/3 of all adults in the US, they do not get their justice needs met. So and that just shows, if you compare it to the rest of the world, how big the justice gap is. And you also know in the US there's a bunch of lawyers, right? So how can it be that with all these lawyers, there's 1.4 million lawyers in the US, how come that 2/3 of the US adults still can't get their justice needs met, right? And what I believe in is that it's because the lawyers haven't adapted to all the tools and automation and technology that's available for them to actually lower their price, to make it more available for people who are looking for a lawyer to actually help them, right? So I think there's an enormous market that is waiting to be kind of connected, and that's really what we try to do at Rightstars. So we've built a marketplace, and in this sense, a true transparent marketplace where all prices are visible to the people, to the individual, and to the lawyers involved in the marketplace. We launched in Brazil, which is another country where the justice gap is very big, and I know Brazil from my time at Help, and in Brazil there's also more than 1 million lawyers, over 1.3 million lawyers, and growing fast, and a lot of people with a lot of problems. And it's the same story. The justice gap is enormous there, and the way that lawyers work is also very, with limited technology and limited automation and limited outsourcing, and a lot of them, and this goes both through the US and in Brazil and in most countries, the vast majority, they work either as solo lawyers or in small firms. Meaning that even if they wanted maybe to take advantage of legal technology, most of the legal technology has been developed for very large law firms or large corporations. That's the vast majority of it. So if you want technology to handle complex litigation, so doing discovery, so you want technology for due diligence, there's tons of providers, but they're also very expensive, right? So it's not very useful for these types of lawyers. So what we're trying to do is kind of build also a tech-enabled law firm for them to some extent, right? So, and we're starting with the very front of the law firm, right? So that you can say the sign of the law office, if we look, and the door that opens, and the welcoming reception. So actually attracting potential clients to them, because that's really what we want to do, is to get all these people who don't know how to find an affordable lawyer, and connect them with affordable lawyers, and not just doing it just simple connection, but actually taking it a step further, and also allowing these people to work together and pay and get paid with some fintech elements. So it's very common in Brazil to pay for stuff in installments. So it can be, I think if Brazilians could pay for their coffee in installments, they would do it. It's that popular. But so lawyers, they of course also try to sell their services in installments, but there's really no good way for them to do that. Also you can say the payment methods in Brazil is still very immature, in the sense that there's still a lot that is cash based. They took a big step in getting more matured with something called PIX that the Brazilian government developed. But still I still think it's 40% or something like that is still cash based, which means that there's a lot of people who would potentially be interested in paying for a lawyer and doing everything more or less online. But then when it comes to the payment, they have to go to the law office with money in their hand to pay the lawyer. And then you try to think in installments. So you as a lawyer, you would somehow agree with your client to pay in installments, meaning that you have to keep track of the installments, but also make sure that the client comes once a month to your law office with some money, right? It just doesn't make any sense.
No.
So what we're trying to do as well is to build a fintech element where you can pay with all the different payment methods that are available. So increasing the span of clients that the lawyers can get access to, and making it easy for these people to pay, and for the lawyers to get paid. So yeah, I think that's gonna be a big game changer as well, in terms of making it accessible for people to get access to lawyers in Brazil.
You were telling me now about Rightstars and your business in Brazil. You told me many interesting things, and I was surprised as well to hear about these issues when it comes to payments, this idea of paying installments, because Brazil is actually home of many fintech unicorns. So it's funny to hear that despite that there are still those issues in there.
Yeah, so I think it's not despite that. I think that's why we see so many fintechs coming out of not just Brazil but Latin America, because they actually have big problems with payments, right? So that's when you have, when you have friction, that's where you have innovation, right? So I think it's more of the other way around, but it's also amazing to see how fast those things actually grow. And I mean, and if you look at the Brazilian government, I think it's, in some ways, there are some things we can learn here in Europe as well. If we look at how well developed their court system is in terms of digitalization. So everything is digitalized. You can do everything online. And many countries in Europe, they don't have that. So maybe that could be a start, because that also allows at least some people to do stuff themselves, so they don't necessarily need to hire a lawyer to do it, which is another way you could also kind of bridge the justice gap, is by allowing more people to do things themselves. So I think we could learn something from that. But also, if you look at PIX, it's such a fantastic story that the Brazilian central bank actually developed the infrastructure for people, and this was actually to get they developed it, and then the way that they kind of sold it, like got mass adoption was, they said to get your COVID support from the Brazilian government, you need to install PIX, because that's how we're going to pay you. And of course that lets hundreds of millions of Brazilians to install PIX, and now it's really a game changer. And I think it's going to be, of course, a big driver in the Brazilian economy, because it just makes it so much easier for payments to flow instead of people using cash. So yeah, I think there's some stuff that Europe could learn from developing countries.
No, I agree. I agree. I mean, when there is this friction, innovation comes. I mean, the world's #1 country in unicorns is precisely India, where there was some friction in
Yeah,
payments. And this is why
yeah,
they are housing right now like so many fintech unicorns trying to solve these issues. And Brazil is a similar case in that sense.
exactly. So now I think I see, like, putting the comparison to LegalTech versus FinTech. I think, you know, we have for many years now seen a boom in FinTech development, right? New banks and all kinds of other ways to make payments flow more easily and be more accessible. That LegalTech is kind of some years behind. So I see now that we will see more and more consumer-facing LegalTech. So before it was, as I mentioned before, it was mostly, you know, big corp, big law LegalTech that really gained traction. You do have something like LegalZoom in the US that is directed more at individuals, but it's more, you know, do it yourself kind of thing. There's not a lot of real support, I would say. But I've started now. I follow this area very closely. So, you know, to watch out for competition, all right, but also just to see what's going on. I start to see more and more what I would call law firm version 2 or something like that. So new types of law firms where they use technology as the foundation of the law firm. And I see them as well be consumer faced. So it's kind of like changing the way that law firms operate and to whom they are available to. And I think that's a very interesting. I've seen a few in Germany, but also in other places in the world. And to me, that's really, really exciting. Something that I think we'll see more and more of.
No, I agree. I agree. I think that's very interesting. And what you said makes perfect sense as well. I mean, the law tends to be quite slow. We always say that whenever some kind of innovation happens, it takes like a few years or even a lot of years to make it to the law. I mean, we know that many of these areas are like artificial intelligence, these new technologies, blockchain, are not that well regulated, because I mean, as we said, the law tends to be slow. So this is why it makes sense that fintech came first, but now legal tech will come strong as well. And related to that, and before wrapping up, now that you told me about the personal journey, Rightstars, and a bit about LegalTech, I wanted to ask you, like, what future do you foresee for the legal tech industry in general, for Rightstars in particular? Anything you want to share about the future? I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I think that future will be I think the new way that I think more and more people will consume legal services like they consume other services, like so buying something on Amazon, I think, or hailing a car on Uber or something like that. I think we will see more and more that it will become a regular, maybe not daily, but more regular activity for consumers and individuals, and also small businesses, that it's going to be a lot more accessible, because with the technology will basically drive down prices for a lot of different legal services. So in the end, I think we will see technology reducing a big part of the justice gap. I really look forward to it. I was really on the mission that I'm personally on, and what we're trying to do as well with Rightstars. But I do believe in it, which also means that there is a lot of existing players that have to probably rethink the way that they're doing their business, and probably should accelerate a little bit more their adoption of LegalTech. I think that's the future. And I think it's very promising.
I agree. I agree. I think it's a very promising future indeed, and I think that in the same way that in fintech, incumbents, and big banks need to change their approach sometimes. Perhaps law
Yeah,
firms will need to change their approach as well in the future. But I mean, it's pretty much what we said before. No, in the same way that it's important to bank as many people as possible, to make them become part of financial systems. It's very
yeah,
important as well to make sure that justice actually reaches everyone. Because I think it's very nice to talk about how justice makes us all equal and we are all entitled to this and that, but in the end, if you need to pay like a money that you don't have to get like something little in return,
yeah.
you're not actually so much part of that system. So um, I think that companies like yours, which allow to solve this gap, what they're doing is actually very interesting and promising, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Ariel, and thanks a lot for having me.
It's been my pleasure, Christian. It's been my pleasure, absolute pleasure to talk to you for over half an hour. And well, to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode about fintech, Christian's company, Rightstars. I hope you could learn a lot. I did, for sure. And please stay tuned for the next episodes. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Bye.